One of the things you mentioned when you were on our podcast last time, which was in 2021, you had said that on Okinawa, the island itself, there's sort of some activist groups that are very negative towards the U.S. presence there, and that it is possible that some of those groups are in fact encouraged by the Chinese Communist Party.
Mm-hmm.
What's the status of that now?
Yeah, those groups, their size and their influence, fortunately, continue to decline as that older population, that anti-war, anti-base population, gets smaller. With that said, they get more and more vocal, and the media in Okinawa is extremely anti-government, anti-base, anti-war in its reporting. Today, for example, one of the two local newspapers in Okinawa took me to task in its newspaper for warning of an early Taiwan contingency, saying that that it's warmongering by identifying China as a threat to the region. So, and they invited another scholar, whom I'm not familiar with, who said that there's no chance that China's going to invade Taiwan.
No chance. Not like in the near future, but just no chance at all.
No chance. The chance is very small, is how it was written.
Uh-huh.
Okay. So, my sense is that the anti-base movement is getting smaller, but they're still very vocal because they have the media to amplify their message. And I would reiterate that they're not suffering financially, even though their numbers are, I think, getting smaller, in part because the Chinese consulate in Fukuoka, there's also a consulate in Naha, is able to funnel an obscene amount of money to these activists.
I mean, I guess to me it just seems like it's very clear that there is concern that China is going to invade Taiwan. They say it, whatever the scholar says. And, President Biden has repeatedly said he would defend Taiwan if China invaded. It seems strange to me that the idea that the U.S. would abandon Okinawa, one of the most important bases it has, to defend Taiwan, because it seems like it's such a global concern now, especially after Russia's invasion of Ukraine, that an invasion of Taiwan will happen.
It seems very short-sighted.
Yeah, it seems impossible to me that they would knowingly be like that. I mean, that's essentially abandoning Taiwan too.
So you're saying the U.S. government, everything it does is incredibly intelligent and makes perfect sense?
Damn, we're dead.
No. So I'm not saying this is absolutely going to happen, but I'm worried about it. And I'm worried that the U.S. is creating some of the conditions to make something like this happen. With regard to the Senkakus, the U.S. needs to correct its mistaken, I call it flawed, Senkaku's policy by clearing up the ambiguity that it created 52 years ago with the Okinawa Reversion Agreement. The previous 77 years, the U.S. was, correct in its policy that the islands belonged to Japan. And the Nixon-Kissinger administration in 1971, when it was negotiating the Okinawa Reversion Agreement, started to pull back from that. The Okinawa Reversion Agreement in June of 1971 was also being undertaken at the time that Kissinger was having his secret interactions with China to facilitate Nixon's eventual visit the following year in February. So as the White House is negotiating the Okinawa Reversion Agreement, it's also preparing for Nixon's visit, and prior to that, Kissinger's visit to China. And so I believe that that the U.S. unfortunately was worried about China's claims to the Senkakus at that time, and left room for China to kind of play a role in this. So I understand that it wouldn't make sense for the U.S. to pull out, but I just think it's going to be, if the Senkakus are taken, and there's really no resistance, it's going to create a lot of friction in the U.S.-Japan alliance. It's going to create a lot of misunderstanding and friction within Japan, and a mutual blame game is going to set in. And I'm not sure what will happen at that point. I hope the U.S. doesn't pull out, but I can see that happening. And one of the reasons we're in this very desperate situation right now, where the U.S. is, I think, unilaterally weakening and worsening its presence, is if you go back to the 2003, 2004, 2005 discussions on the transformation of the U.S. military. At the time, the Bush administration, Rumsfeld, came up with the plan to pull back U.S. forces to Guam, to relocate Marines out of Okinawa to Guam. That was a unilateral decision. There was no serious request from the Japanese side. Later, the U.S. said, "Oh, let's make this look like it's a Japanese request." It was purely a U.S. move at that time. And so by pulling back, or announcing that we're pulling back, we're essentially creating a vacuum in the area. And the recent 2+2 had to correct that and describe that it was, changing the structure of the Marine Division there, and that it wouldn't be going to Guam. So the U.S., I don't think, has a great record on doing things intelligently in the region.
Can you explain a little bit about the 2+2 agreement and what the significance of that is?
Yeah. So this recent 2+2 agreement seeks to, I think, strengthen Japan and U.S. coordination on a whole host of issues, from conventional warfare to cyber and space as well. In general, it's a pretty good agreement, I think, but on a couple of issues, several issues actually, I think it missed some good opportunities.
So before we get into that, like the two and the other two, like what is, for our viewers who haven't heard of 2+2, like what are those things?
Right. So 2+2 is essentially abbreviation for the foreign minister and defense minister of Japan and their U.S. counterparts. So U.S. Secretary of State and U.S. Secretary of Defense that would meet part of within the framework of the alliance, in this case the U.S.-Japan alliance, under the Security Consultative Committee, the SCC, and they would either update agreements or come up with the road ahead for strengthening the relationship between the two militaries. And it's not 100% limited to military matters. It'll include other matters as well, but it's generally diplomacy and military focused. And in this case, we're at a really key juncture where I think more than at any point in our histories, the two countries are seeing the region, quite similarly, if not identically. Whether it's the threat from North Korea, from China, and Russia as well. So I think the viewpoints are very, very aligned, but the thinking about what's needed to accomplish the goals, to me, didn't go far enough as it could have. So one example would be on shared use of U.S. facilities, U.S. bases in Japan. In mainland Japan, the main U.S. bases are shared use, joint use. But in Okinawa, which is probably where much of the fight is going to be, essentially the U.S. remains on U.S. bases and the Japanese remain on their bases. And so they're not living together, working together, or really training together as much as they could. And I often relate the U.S.-Japan alliance as sort of a marriage. A marriage, I think, is strongest when the husband and wife are living together and not living separately. So they talk about increasing joint use, but they don't provide any really strong or clear messages in that regard.
I mean, it sounds like the U.S. and Japan need some marriage counseling.
Or some hand-holding, I think. I've been calling for shared use, joint use for more than 2 decades and have published commentaries from the early 2000s on that. It's taken a long time to get to this point, but there's still a long ways to go.